Hi, my name is Arvind, and today I'm here to discuss the topic French Revolution. First of all, let us try to understand the meaning of the term revolution. We usually see that with the passage of time, society changes. But in the case of a revolution, we see a sudden drastic change taking place in society in a short span of time. To understand revolution even better, let us take a quote of Vladimir Lenin, the Russian revolutionary. Lenin said, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. Revolution is all about decades happening in weeks. Now that we have understood the meaning of the term revolution, let us talk about France. France is this Western European country with its capital city, Paris, which is one of the most visited cities in the world. Paris also has the iconic Eiffel Tower, the famous museum Louvre. And in this chapter, French Revolution, we are going to look at the history of France of the late 18th century. The year in which the revolution breaks out is 1789. Now, before we dive deep into the chapter, let us try to understand why do we study French Revolution? What is the need to study French Revolution? I mean, we are in India, and let's be honest, France is not one of our neighboring countries. France is not even in Asia. It's a faraway country situated in the western part of Europe. Then from an Indian point of view, what is the need to study French Revolution? Let's try to answer this question. First of all, French Revolution is associated with ideas like liberty, equality, and fraternity. And these ideas have inspired countless leaders and numerous countries all around the world. Our own country, India, which boasts of being world's largest democracy, which has world's longest written constitution, has the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity mentioned in the preamble of the Constitution. Not just that, we have several Indian reformers, Indian leaders like Ram Mohan Roy, who was influenced by French Revolution. Ram Mohan Roy, as you know, is associated with abolishing the practice of sati. Another Indian leader who was inspired by the French Revolution was B.R. Ambedkar, who was instrumental in making India's constitution. In 18th century India, Mysore was under the rule of Tipu Sultan, and Tipu Sultan was good friends with the French. In fact, Tipu Sultan, with the help of the French, was able to modernize his army during late 18th century. Tipu Sultan was also associated with French Revolution. In fact, Tipu Sultan was a member of the Jacobin Club and he planted the tree of liberty at his capital Srirangapatnam. I hope after all these arguments I must have convinced you to study French Revolution. So let us dive deep into French Revolution and let us first of all understand the political situation that existed in France before the revolution. First of all, France was under the rule of Bourbon dynasty. It was a monarchy, which means that in France, the people belonging to one particular family continued to rule France generation after generation. The king during whose rule the revolution breaks out was Louis XVI. Louis XVI became the king of France in the year 1774 and he was married to Austrian princess Marie Antoinette. So in 1774, when Louis XVI did become the king of France, he was quite young and he had very little experience about governance or administration. Next, let us talk about the economic situation that existed in France. First of all, the French treasury was empty, which tells us that France economically was struggling. Now, treasury or money in simple terms is something that is essential for any kingdom, or for that matter even in modern day nation. Money is essential for administration. But during those times, when Louis XVI became the emperor of France, France saw that its treasury was empty. Now, what was the reason behind this? The first reason was France was locked in a battle with Britain, its arch enemy, for domination. And that became one of the reasons for the depletion of French treasury. Another reason, United States of America, that today you see as an independent country, was once a colony of Great Britain. And the French were helping the Americans to gain independence from the British rule. But while doing so, they were again draining their own financial resources. Another reason for the deteriorating condition in France was the French state had borrowed a lot of money and the interest rate had increased. As a result, now they owed more money to people. And to add insult to injury, despite the economic hardships that the French state and its people were facing, the royal family were enjoying a luxurious life, a lavish life in their famous palace of Versailles. If you look at today's France, in its capital city Paris, very close to it lies the Palace of Versailles, a magnificent palace. And to maintain that palace, a lot of financial resources was required. So this became another reason for the empty treasury in France. Another aspect of those times was rising population. So from the year 1715 to 1789, France witnessed a rise of population from 23 million to 28 million. But the problem was the agricultural production could not keep pace with the rising population, and as a result, the ordinary men and women of France faced severe food shortages. Something as essential as bread became scarce in France. After discussing the political and economic situation in France, I hope now you're able to visualize that in France during that time, the king Louis XVI was very young and inexperienced, the treasury was empty, the rate of interest were high, the ordinary men and women were finding it difficult to feed themselves, and the king was busy living his luxurious life. He was indifferent to the suffering of the masses. Now, this is a recipe for disaster, and disaster it was for the royal family. Now, let us further try to understand the social situation in France. France was a monarchy, it was under the rule of a king. And a situated that existed in France at that point of time was a system in which the entire population was divided in three estates. The first estate consisted of the clergy, the second were associated with nobles, and the third, the common people. Let us one by one try to understand each one of them. Now, clergy are the people who are associated with the church. As you know, most of the people back then followed Christianity, and that's why the clergy were the people who were associated with church. They were men of religion. The second estate comprised of nobles. Now, who are nobles? In easy language, one can say that nobles are those rich, well off people who owned a lot of land and wealth, and they had very good relations with the crown. So they were the nobles. Now the third estate is of common people, and maximum number of people in France belong to this third estate. This third estate was not a homogeneous group like first or second estate. The third estate was a very diverse group. It comprised of people who were educated, who were rich, lawyers, businessmen, traders, merchants. The third estate also comprised of peasants and landless laborers. So the point I'm trying to make is that third estate, unlike first or second estate, was not a homogeneous group, but it was a very diverse group which comprised of educated masses as well as those people who were poor and illiterate. So this was how the society in France was divided.